Picture this: a pyramid, but not one made of stone. This pyramid stands 40 feet high, constructed from the skulls of 70,000 people. The architect? A limping conqueror who believes he's the scourge of God. The location? Isfahan, Persia, 1387. And this is just one city, one conquest, one monument in a trail of destruction that would claim 17 million lives, 5% of the entire human population at the time. His name was Timur. The world would come to know him as Tamerlane, Timur the Lame, and in just 35 years this man who could barely walk would build an empire stretching from Delhi to Damascus, from the steppes of Russia to the gates of China. He would defeat sultans and khans, topple dynasties that had stood for centuries, and leave behind a legacy written in blood and ash. But here's what makes his story truly chilling. He succeeded where Genghis Khan's descendants failed. He rebuilt the Mongol Empire not through birthright, but through calculated brutality and tactical genius. And unlike other conquerors who killed out of necessity or passion, Tamerlane killed with purpose. Each massacre a message, each pyramid of skulls a signature. This is the story of history's most successful nomadic conqueror. A story most history books gloss over. A story darker than you can imagine. If you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more stories like this. And drop a comment to tell me where you're listening from. I love knowing that we're exploring these dark secrets of history together, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity. Now, let's return to the story. The year is 1336. Central Asia is a graveyard of empires. The Mongol successor states tear at each other like starving wolves. The great Ilkhanate of Persia is collapsing. The Chagatai Khanate, which once ruled everything from the Caspian Sea to China, has splintered into warring factions. Trade routes that once connected east and west are now battlefields. Cities that prospered under Mongol peace now burn in endless civil wars. Into this chaos, in the town of Kesh near Samarkand, a boy is born. They name him Timur. We don't have gentle childhood stories about young Timur, no tales of precocious wisdom or youthful virtue. What we do know paints a picture of calculated ambition from the start. By his early 20s, Timur is already a warrior and a sheep thief, raiding caravans across the Silk Road. This isn't petty crime. It's entrepreneurship in a world where violence is currency. He gathers followers, builds a reputation, learns the arts of war and politics in the hardest school imaginable, survival. During one of these raids, everything changes. Timur takes 2 arrows. One pierces his right leg, shattering bone. The other destroys 2 fingers on his right hand. The injuries never heal properly. For the rest of his life, he walks with a pronounced limp, his right side permanently weakened. When Soviet archaeologists opened his tomb in 1941, they confirmed it. His right leg was withered, the hip socket malformed. Every step he took for the next 50 years was agony. In most stories, this would be where our hero overcomes his disability through courage and determination. But Tamerlane's story is darker than that. He doesn't overcome his disability, he weaponizes it. The limp becomes his signature, his brand. Enemies see him limping onto the battlefield and underestimate him. That's their last mistake. His soldiers see him enduring constant pain without complaint, and it makes him seem superhuman. His enemies call him Timur the Lame, Tamerlane, as an insult. He turns it into a title that strikes fear across 3 continents. By 1360, Timur has made himself indispensable to Tughluq Timur, the Khan of the Eastern Chagatai Khanate. He's proven himself as a commander, a diplomat, a survivor. But indispensable doesn't mean loyal. When Tughluq dies in 1363, Timur seizes opportunity. He allies with Amir Hussein, who happens to be his brother-in-law. Together, they wage a decade-long war against anyone who stands between them and total power over Transoxiana, the heartland of Central Asia, the land between the Oxus and Jaxartes rivers, the crossroads of the world. For 10 years they're inseparable, brothers in arms. They share victories and defeats, food and shelter, danger and triumph. They swear oaths of eternal brotherhood. And then, in 1370, Timur decides the partnership has served its purpose. Here's where Timur's true nature reveals itself. After years of brotherhood, after countless battles fought side by side, Timur turns on Hussein without warning. He besieges him, captures him, and has him executed. Not in the heat of battle, not in a moment of passion. Coldly, deliberately, methodically. The official reason? Political necessity. The real reason? Timur tolerates no equals. Not brothers-in-law, not blood brothers, not anyone. On April 9, 1370, at the age of 34, Timur proclaims himself sovereign ruler of the Chagatai Khanate. But there's a problem, and it's fundamental. Timur isn't a descendant of Genghis Khan. In the Mongol world, legitimacy flows from blood. Only those carrying the bloodline of the great Khan can claim the title of Khan. For anyone else to take that title would be blasphemy, would unite every Mongol clan against them. So Timur does something clever and telling. He never calls himself Khan. Instead, he takes the title Emir, commander, and installs a puppet Khan from Genghis's lineage to maintain the illusion of legitimacy. The puppet sits on the throne during ceremonies, wears the crown, receives the formal deference, but everyone knows who actually rules. Everyone knows where the power lies. The puppet even has to ride beside Timur during military campaigns, a living prop to legitimize the real ruler. This matters because it reveals Timur's genius. He understands that power isn't just about force, it's about perception, about giving people the symbols they need while holding the actual levers of control. He's willing to humble himself before a fiction if it serves his purpose. Pride means nothing. Power means everything. And now, with Transoxiana under his thumb and Samarkand as his capital, Timur is ready to show the world what a wounded wolf can do when it finally breaks free. Let's talk about how Tamerlane conquered, because it wasn't like other conquerors. Alexander swept through with charisma and tactical brilliance. Genghis Khan built a system of merit and organization. Even the most brutal medieval rulers killed out of rage or religious fervor. Timur was different. He killed with cold, calculated purpose. He turned terror into a science. When Tamerlane approaches a city, he sends messengers ahead. The message is simple. Submit now, pay tribute, open your gates, and you'll be incorporated into the empire. Your leaders might be replaced, your taxes will increase, but your people will live. Your city will stand. Your children will grow old. Resist, and the city will be erased from existence. Most cities, hearing about what happened to those who resisted before, open their gates immediately. The tribute is harsh, the humiliation stings, but it's better than the alternative. Those that don't, that's where the darkness begins. That's where Tamerlane shows what happens when you defy him. In 1381, Timur lays siege to Zaranj in what's now Afghanistan. The city has strong walls, fresh water, stored food. The governor is confident they can outlast any siege. For several months they hold out. Timur's soldiers hurl themselves at the walls and are thrown back. The siege drags on. Other commanders might give up, might negotiate a settlement, might simply bypass the city. Not Timur. When Zaranj finally falls, through treachery, through exhaustion, the details are lost to history. Timur orders his soldiers to execute every single inhabitant. Not just the soldiers who fought, not just the governor and his advisors, everyone, men, women, children, the elderly, the blind, the sick, the infirm, everyone. The killing takes days, house by house, room by room. His soldiers work methodically. There's no passion in it, no rage, just cold efficiency. But Timur isn't finished. The city itself is demolished stone by stone. Not just the fortifications, everything. Mosques, homes, markets, gardens. Crops are burned, irrigation systems are destroyed, wells are filled with corpses and rubble, the earth is salted. When Timur leaves, there is nothing. Not even ruins that might be rebuilt. Just absence. Just a scar on the landscape where a city used to be. And here's the thing. This isn't rage. This isn't passion or revenge. This is calculated. Timur is sending a message to every other city in the region. This is the cost of resistance, and the message works. Cities across Persia and Central Asia hear about Zaranj and surrender without a fight. They open their gates, they pay the tribute, they bend the knee. Because the alternative isn't defeat, it's annihilation. But Zaranj is just the beginning, just the proof of concept. In 1387, Timur arrives at Isfahan, one of Persia's most beautiful and prosperous cities. Isfahan has actually already surrendered once before and paid tribute. The city's gates open peacefully. Timur's garrison moved in. Everything seemed settled. But when Timur's tax collectors arrive to extract the agreed tribute, the citizens revolt. The taxes are too high, the collectors too brutal. The city rises up and kills the tax collectors, every single one. For Timur, this is the ultimate crime. This is his line in the sand. You can surrender, but you cannot rebel. Surrender is pragmatism. Rebellion is betrayal. And betrayal requires an example that will be remembered for centuries. Timur returns with his entire army. He doesn't besiege Isfahan. The gates are already broken from the revolt. He simply enters and orders a massacre. The slaughter lasts for days. Contemporary historians, and we have to be careful with numbers from this era, they tend toward exaggeration, but even conservative estimates are staggering, claim that 70,000 people are killed. 70,000 in a medieval city. The streets run with blood. The smell of death becomes so overwhelming that even Timur's hardened soldiers complain. And then comes the true horror. Timur orders his soldiers to build pyramids from their skulls, multiple pyramids throughout the city, each reaching 40 feet high. Each soldier is required to bring a quota of heads. 2 per soldier, some sources say. Can you imagine? Soldiers counting severed heads like harvest wheat, stacking them into precise geometric forms. The pyramids are built with mortar and carefully arranged so they'll last. These aren't temporary displays. They're monuments. They're architecture. Here's what makes this particularly chilling. The skull pyramids aren't just brutality. They're communication. They're billboards advertising the cost of defiance. Travellers on the Silk Road see them from miles away. Merchants spread stories about them across 3 continents. Ambassadors report back to their kings about the pyramids of Isfahan. And they work. After Isfahan, the rate of resistance across Timur's conquest drops dramatically. Cities compete to surrender faster, to prove their loyalty, to avoid becoming the next example. But wait, it gets darker. In 1398, Timur invades India. The Delhi Sultanate has grown wealthy and complacent. Sultan Mahmud rules from his palace, confident that distance and geography protect him. Timur crosses the Hindu Kush mountains in winter, something no sane commander would attempt, and appears in northern India like a nightmare made flesh. Before the Battle of Delhi even begins, Timur has a problem. His army has captured over 100,000 prisoners from campaigns across northern India. These are civilians, mostly. Farmers, merchants, craftsmen, their families. They're not combatants. They haven't resisted. They've simply been swept up in the army's advance. And now they're a logistical nightmare. They require guards and food. They slow the army down. And there's always the risk they might revolt or escape and join the enemy. On the night before the Battle of Delhi, Timur's commanders come to him with this problem. They propose various solutions. Release them, enslave them, use them as human shields. Timur listens to all the proposals. Then he gives an order that still echoes through history. Kill them all. Not in battle. Not as punishment for resistance. Not for any crime at all. Simply because they're inconvenient. Simply because they complicate his battle plans. According to contemporary accounts, over 100,000 captives are executed in a single day. Timur's officers go to their divisions and relay the order. The soldiers, many of whom have grown attached to their captives, who have been feeding them and guarding them for weeks, go to work. The executions happen in the camps. The soldiers go from tent to tent, killing methodically. Fathers kill entire families with their own hands to ensure it's done quickly, to spare them prolonged terror. Children die in their mother's arms. The elderly die without understanding why. The screaming starts at dawn and lasts until midday, then fades to whimpers, then silence. By sunset, 100,000 people are dead, their bodies left where they fell. And here's the sickest part. Many of Timur's own soldiers object. These aren't enemy combatants. These are captives who have surrendered, who have obeyed, who pose no threat. Some soldiers refuse the order and are executed themselves for disobedience. Others carry out the order but are haunted by it for the rest of their lives. But Timur is unmoved. Military necessity, he calls it. The prisoners die. Then comes the Battle of Delhi itself. Despite the massive pre-battle execution, despite the moral blow to his own army, Timur wins decisively. Sultan Mahmud's forces are routed. Timur enters Delhi and promises not to harm the civilians if they pay tribute and remain peaceful. For a few days this arrangement holds. Then his soldiers, drunk on victory and plunder, begin looting anyway. The citizens, pushed past endurance, resist. Timur uses this as an excuse to order a general massacre. For days Delhi burns. The death toll estimates range wildly. Contemporary sources claim anywhere from 100,000 to 1 million. Modern historians can't agree because the number is so incomprehensibly large that accurate counting becomes meaningless. What we know is that entire neighbourhoods are depopulated. Entire districts burn to the ground. The Yamuna River runs red with blood. The sky darkens with smoke. And when Timur finally calls off his soldiers, Delhi is a corpse of a city. When Timur leaves India 3 months later, he takes with him cartloads of wealth, thousands of enslaved artisans to beautify Samarkand, 90 war elephants, and leaves behind a death toll so massive that Delhi doesn't fully recover for over a century. Some historians argue that northern India's trajectory was permanently altered, its power structure so disrupted that it opened the door for the later Mughal conquest, which ironically would be carried out by Timur's own descendants. But Tamerlane isn't just about brutality and shock value. What makes him truly terrifying, what elevates him above other medieval warlords, is his mind. He thinks like a chess grandmaster, seeing moves and countermoves years in advance. He understands psychology, logistics, politics, economics. He's not just a destroyer, he's an architect of destruction. Consider the Golden Horde. For over a century, this Mongol state has dominated the steppes of Russia and Ukraine, extracting tribute from Russian princes, controlling the trade routes between Europe and Asia, ruling as the terror of Eastern Europe. Its Khan, Tokhtamysh, was once Timur's protégé. Timur had actually helped Tokhtamysh gain power, supporting him militarily and financially in his struggle for the throne. By all rights, Tokhtamysh should be Timur's grateful ally. But in 1385, Tokhtamysh raids Timur's territories in the Caucasus. It's a test, a probe. Maybe he thinks Timur is too old, too distracted by campaigns in Persia. Maybe he underestimates his former patron. Maybe he simply wants to expand his own power. Whatever the reason, it's a catastrophic miscalculation. Timur's response is methodical. Over the next decade, he launches 5 separate campaigns against the Golden Horde. 5. Not one massive invasion, but 5 systematic campaigns designed to destroy the Golden Horde's power base piece by piece. This isn't about revenge or hot blood. It's about systematic destruction, about breaking a rival so completely they can never threaten him again. The first campaign in 1387 is a warning shot. Timur raids deep into Golden Horde territory, defeats Tokhtamysh in battle, and withdraws. It's a statement. I can reach you whenever I want. The second and third campaigns in 1389 and 1391 go deeper. Timur doesn't just defeat armies. He burns cities, destroys infrastructure, disrupts the trade networks that fund the Golden Horde's power. He's not conquering territory, he's systematically dismantling an empire. Tokhtamysh keeps fighting back, keeps rebuilding, but each campaign leaves him weaker. His nobles start questioning his leadership. His vassal states start looking for other protectors. His economic base erodes as trade routes shift south to avoid the conflict. Timur is patient. He can afford to be. He's fighting a war of attrition against an enemy who can't afford to lose. The fourth campaign comes in 1394, and this time Timur brings the full weight of his empire to bear. He doesn't just raid, he occupies. He doesn't just defeat Tokhtamysh's army, he pursues the survivors deep into the steppes, harrying them until they're scattered to the winds. The final campaign comes in 1395, and it's less a war than an execution. Timur's army sweeps through the Golden Horde's territories like a scythe through wheat. The capital, Sarai Burq, is obliterated, not just conquered, but demolished. Every building is torn down, every fortification is destroyed. The site is left as a warning. This is what happens to those who defy me. When Timur is finished, the Golden Horde is shattered into fragments that will never reunite. Tokhtamysh is a fugitive, eventually murdered by his own former allies. The power vacuum Timur creates will eventually be filled by the Grand Duchy of Moscow, the future Russian Empire. Timur literally redrew the map of Eastern Europe without intending to, simply as a side effect of destroying a rival. That's the scale we're talking about. Then there's the Ottoman Empire, and this story reveals Timur's understanding of psychology and propaganda as much as military might. In 1400, Sultan Bayezid I, known as the Thunderbolt for his lightning-fast military campaigns, is at the height of his power. He's conquered most of Anatolia, integrated it into his empire. He's besieging Constantinople, the last remnant of the Byzantine Empire. He's threatening to overrun all of Eastern Europe. The Hungarians fear him, the Venetians pay him tribute. He seems unstoppable, the rising power of the age. Timur sends envoys to Bayezid asking him to recognize Timur's authority and return territories in eastern Anatolia that Bayezid has recently conquered. These territories had belonged to Timur's vassals before Bayezid absorbed them. It's a reasonable diplomatic request, the kind made between great powers. Bayezid's response is catastrophically arrogant. He doesn't just refuse, he insults Timur. He calls him a bandit, a barbarian, a crippled old man playing at empire. He makes crude jokes about Timur's limp. He says things about Timur's wives that are so offensive contemporary chroniclers refuse to record them directly. He sends the envoys back with their beards shaved, a terrible insult in that culture, and a message: come and take the territory if you dare. This is Bayezid's fatal mistake, because he thinks Timur is an old nomad warlord, a relic of the Mongol past. He doesn't understand that Timur is something far more dangerous, a strategic genius with unlimited patience and resources who has been waiting for exactly this kind of provocation. Timur doesn't rush into war. First, he spends a year securing his supply lines, gathering intelligence on Ottoman military dispositions, and forming alliances with Bayezid's enemies. And Bayezid has made many enemies. The Anatolian beyliks that Bayezid recently conquered? They're happy to provide information and support against their new overlord. The Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, which sees the Ottomans as a threat. They ensure their borders remain quiet, giving Timur freedom of movement. The Christian states of Europe, who fear Ottoman expansion. They secretly rejoice and do nothing to help Bayezid. Then, in 1402, Timur invades Anatolia with an army of nearly 200,000 men, one of the largest armies assembled in medieval history. He brings cavalry from the steppes, infantry from Persia, war elephants from India, siege engineers from Syria. It's not just an army, it's a demonstration of imperial power, a statement that every corner of his vast empire has contributed to Bayezid's destruction. The armies meet at Ankara on July 20th, 1402. On paper, it should be an even match. Both sides have roughly similar numbers. Both have experienced commanders and battle-hardened troops. But Timur has done something brilliant, something that demonstrates his understanding of warfare beyond simple tactics. He's arrived early and cut off Ankara's water supply. The city's wells and streams are poisoned or blocked. His army is positioned between the Ottomans and the nearest clean water sources. Bayezid's army, which has marched for days in the brutal Anatolian summer heat, is already desperately thirsty before the battle even begins. His soldiers' lips are cracked, their throats parched. Their discipline is fraying, and Timur's fresh, well-watered troops stand ready. The battle itself becomes a massacre. Timur's war elephants. Yes, he brought elephants all the way from India specifically for this battle. Terrify the Ottoman cavalry. Horses won't approach elephants. They can smell the foreignness, the danger. The Ottoman cavalry charges break apart before they even reach Timur's lines. The Serbian knights and Anatolian auxiliaries, whom Bayezid has recently conquered and doesn't quite trust, see which way the wind is blowing. They defect to Timur's side in the middle of the battle, suddenly turning on their Ottoman masters. It's chaos. Bayezid's careful battle plans disintegrate, his centre collapses, his wings are rolled up. By sunset, the Ottoman army is destroyed and Bayezid himself, the mighty thunderbolt, is captured trying to flee the field. Now, what happens next is disputed by historians, but the legend is too dark and too telling not to mention. According to some sources, Timur keeps Bayezid in a cage. Not a punishment cell, a literal cage, like you'd keep an animal in. The cage is supposedly gilded, and Bayezid is fed and treated relatively well, not tortured or abused, but he's displayed, paraded, shown to delegations and visitors like a trophy animal. Some sources say Timur uses the cage as a footstool when mounting his horse, forcing the Sultan of the Ottomans to serve as furniture. Others say Bayezid is forced to watch as Timur's officers take turns with his wife. Still others claim these stories are Christian propaganda. invented by Europeans who wanted to believe the Muslim rulers were savaging each other. What we know for certain is that Bayezid dies in captivity 8 months later. Some say from despair and humiliation, others from apoplexy brought on by rage at his treatment. His son has to ransom his body to give him a proper burial. True or not, the story spreads throughout the medieval world with the speed of wildfire. From London to Beijing, people hear about the caged sultan, and the message is clear. No one is beyond Timur's reach. Not the Golden Horde, not the Ottoman Sultan, not anyone. Your power, your prestige, your army, none of it matters. Defy Timur and you'll end your days in a cage. Here's what most people don't understand about Tamerlane, what makes his impact on history so profound and so dark. He didn't just conquer territories, he murdered populations. And I don't mean in the way all conquerors kill, I mean he deliberately systematically depopulated entire regions. He turned flourishing lands into deserts. He created a world of ghosts. When Timur conquers a region, he typically does one of 3 things. He either incorporates compliant cities into his tribute system. They pay taxes, provide soldiers, acknowledge his authority, and in return they're left relatively intact. Or he destroys resistant cities completely. The Zaranj model, where nothing remains but scorched earth. Or, and this is perhaps darkest of all, he deports entire populations of skilled craftsmen and artisans to Samarkand. Imagine you're a master architect in Damascus, one of the great cities of Islam. Your family has lived in this city for 10 generations. You've spent your life perfecting your craft, building structures that glorify God and serve your community. Your workshop is known throughout Syria. Your father taught you, and you're teaching your sons. You're part of an unbroken chain of knowledge stretching back centuries. Then Timur arrives. Damascus, understanding what resistance means, surrenders immediately. The gates open, the tribute is paid. You think you'll be safe, and technically you are. You're not killed. Instead, soldiers come to your home with a list. Your name is on it. You and your family are given hours to pack what you can carry. Then you're marched out of Damascus in a column with thousands of other craftsmen, their families, their apprentices. You march for months, across deserts and mountains, through winter snows and summer heat. Some people die on the road, the old, the sick, the very young. They're left where they fall. No burial, no ceremony. Just bodies marking the trail like mile markers. You see your world shrinking in the distance behind you until Damascus is just a memory, a story you'll tell your children who will barely believe you. You arrive in Samarkand, a city you've never heard of in a land you can't pronounce. And you're put to work building monuments that glorify your captor. Your skills, your knowledge, your art. It all now belongs to Samarkand. You'll never see Damascus again. Your children will grow up speaking a different language. Your grandchildren will barely remember where their family came from. Your great-grandchildren will think of themselves as Samarkandi, will have no connection to Damascus at all. This happens to thousands of people from dozens of cities. Damascus, Aleppo, Baghdad, Delhi, Isfahan, all hemorrhage their most talented citizens. The best architects, the finest calligraphers, the most skilled metalworkers, the greatest scholars, all forcibly relocated to Samarkand. It's cultural genocide and cultural creation happening simultaneously. The conquered cities are drained of the very people who made them great. Samarkand grows fat on stolen genius. And here's the terrible irony. Samarkand becomes one of the most beautiful cities in the world. The forced architects and artisans, working with unlimited resources and under threat of death, build mosques that take your breath away. The Bibi Khanum Mosque, with its massive portal and soaring domes, the Shai Zinda necropolis, with its intricate tilework that seems to shimmer in the sun, the Registan, which won't be completed until after Timur's death, but builds on the foundation he establishes. Timur brings back scholars from Persia, poets from India, scientists from Syria. He establishes libraries filled with looted manuscripts. He builds observatories and schools. In Samarkand, culture flourishes. Artists compete for patronage. Scholars debate philosophy and mathematics. It becomes a beacon of learning and beauty, a city that rivals Baghdad in its glory days. But this beauty has a foundation of skulls. Every beautiful building in Samarkand represents a city stripped of its treasures, its knowledge, its people. Every scholarly debate happens in a city built on genocide. The gardens of Samarkand bloom while the gardens of Isfahan lie fallow, untended because the gardeners are dead or enslaved. The empire Timur builds is vast. It stretches from the Mediterranean to India, from the Russian steppes to the Persian Gulf. At its height, it's larger than any state in the world except Ming China. But it's an empire of ghosts. So many cities have been destroyed, so many people killed or displaced, that huge swathes of his empire are simply empty. Fertile farmland lies fallow because there's no one left to farm it. Entire irrigation systems, maintained for centuries, fall into disrepair because the engineers who understood them are dead. Trade routes fall silent because the merchants are gone and the caravanserais are ruins. Wolves and wild dogs roam through abandoned villages. In some regions, the population doesn't recover to pre-Timur levels for 200 years. Ibn Khaldun, the great Arab historian and philosopher, actually meets Timur in January 1401 during the siege of Damascus. He's in the city when Timur arrives, trapped like everyone else, but Timur, who respects learning, summons him for an audience. They meet several times over the following weeks, and Ibn Khaldun records their conversations in detail. He describes Timur as highly intelligent, deeply curious about philosophy, history, and statecraft. They discuss Ibn Khaldun's theories about the rise and fall of civilizations. Timur asks probing questions about political theory, about the nature of power, about how empires sustain themselves. He's read widely, or had books read to him since Timur is only semi-literate. He impresses Ibn Khaldun with his insight and knowledge, but Ibn Khaldun also sees the pyramids of skulls outside the city walls. He watches as craftsmen are selected for deportation, as treasures are catalogued for transport to Samarkand. He understands he's conversing with a monster, an intelligent, cultured, philosophically sophisticated monster, but a monster nonetheless. In his writings, you can sense his confusion, his inability to reconcile the thoughtful man asking about historical cycles with the mass murderer who has killed millions. It's a cognitive dissonance that haunts everyone who meets Timur. How can the same man discuss poetry and build pyramids from human heads? How can someone patron scholars and scientists while systematically destroying cities? There's no easy answer. Timur contains multitudes, and some of those multitudes are incomprehensibly dark. By 1404, Tamerlane is 68 years old. By medieval standards, he's ancient. His body is failing. He can barely walk without assistance. His right side is partially paralyzed from old wounds that have gotten worse with age. He has to be carried on a litter during military campaigns. Most men his age would be preparing for death, making peace with their gods and their enemies, distributing their wealth to their heirs. Not Timur. He's planning the invasion of China. Think about that for a moment. He's conquered everything from Turkey to India. His empire is the largest in the world at that moment. He's already cemented his legacy as one of history's greatest conquerors. He could retire to Samarkand, enjoy his gardens and his palaces, watch his grandsons grow, spend his final years in comfort and luxury. Instead, he's mobilizing an army of 200,000 men to invade the Ming dynasty, the most powerful empire on earth. Why? Multiple reasons, all quintessentially Timur. First, because Genghis Khan did it, and Timur sees himself as Genghis's true heir. Second, because the Ming dynasty refuses to acknowledge Timur as the rightful successor to the Mongol Empire. They send him letters addressing him as a mere regional governor, a deliberate insult. Third, and perhaps most importantly, because in Timur's mind the conquest is never finished. There's always one more kingdom to subjugate, one more rival to crush, one more legacy to eclipse. His advisors object, his generals object, even his sons object. The invasion is madness. China is massive, wealthy, well defended. The logistics alone are nightmarish. How do you supply 200,000 men marching across the steppes in winter? What happens when they reach China and face the Ming armies, which number in the millions? Timur listens to all the objections. Then he gives the order to march. In December 1404, in the dead of winter, Timur marches his enormous army eastward toward China. It's insane. The army is crossing frozen steppes in weather that kills horses and men alike. The temperature drops below freezing every night. Soldiers freeze to death in their sleep. Supply lines are stretched to breaking. Food runs low. But Timur pushes forward, carried on his litter at the head of the army, refusing to turn back. And then, in February 1405, in the town of Otrar near the Syr Darya River, still hundreds of miles from the Chinese border, Timur falls ill. It starts with a fever, then chills, then delirium. His doctors try everything, medieval medicine being what it is, which is to say mostly useless. They bleed him. They give him herbal concoctions. They pray. Nothing works. For days he lies in his tent while his enormous army waits outside in the snow, not knowing if they're about to invade China or if their entire world is about to collapse. The fever rages. Timur drifts in and out of consciousness. According to some accounts, in his lucid moments he still gives orders, still plans the campaign, still refuses to acknowledge that he's dying. On February 17th, 1405, at around 2 a.m, Tamerlane dies, not in battle, cut down by a worthy enemy, not murdered by rivals in some dramatic betrayal. He dies in bed, probably from pneumonia or some other respiratory infection, brought down by an enemy he can't defeat with swords or tactics, his own failing body. The man who conquered half the known world is killed by a microbe. The news spreads through the camp like wildfire, and immediately everything falls apart. Timur's sons and grandsons, who have been waiting for this moment for years, begin fighting over the succession. The puppet Khan, who has been dutifully riding alongside Timur all these years, suddenly finds no one cares about his legitimacy anymore. The army starts to dissolve as generals take their forces and head back to their own territories, securing their power bases before anyone else can claim them. The invasion of China is abandoned before it even begins. The enormous army simply melts away into the steppes, breaking into smaller and smaller groups until there's nothing left but scattered bands heading home. By the time Timur's body is brought back to Samarkand for burial, a journey that takes weeks, his empire is already fracturing. The governors of distant provinces start declaring independence. Vassal states stop paying tribute. The whole structure, held together by Timur's will and reputation, begins to collapse. Here's what makes Tamerlane's story truly fascinating and deeply disturbing. Within 2 generations, his empire completely falls apart. His sons fight brutal civil wars, his grandsons carve up what's left. By 1450, just 45 years after his death, the Timurid Empire barely controls anything beyond Transoxiana. As a political entity, it's a complete failure, but his legacy, that lasts forever, in the strangest, darkest ways imaginable. His great-great-great-grandson Babur founds the Mughal Empire in India in 1526. The Mughals rule for over 300 years, creating the Taj Mahal, fundamentally shaping South Asia. And they claim descent from Timur, not Genghis Khan, as their source of legitimacy. The man who massacred 100,000 people before breakfast becomes a dynasty founder. The skull pyramids. The 17 million dead, conveniently forgotten. In Central Asia and Persia, something even stranger happens. Within a century, Timur becomes a folk hero. Poems glorify his conquests. Persian miniature paintings depict him as a wise king, a noble warrior, a cultured patron. The paintings don't show the skull pyramids or the burning cities. Art serves mythology, not truth. In modern Uzbekistan, Timur is everywhere. His statue replaced marks in Tashkent's main square. His face appears on currency. Museums celebrate his genius. Schools teach his accomplishments. Trade expansion, Samarkand's beautification, patronage of arts. The massacres, products of their time. Why focus on that when you can focus on the beautiful mosques? This is the paradox. The man who caused more death than perhaps any conqueror except the Mongols becomes a symbol of national pride. The mass murderer and empire builder, the terrorist and art patron, the same person. And maybe the darkest truth isn't that he was uniquely evil. The darkest truth is that it worked. The terror secured his empire. The brutality bought compliance. The massacres became his reputation, and his reputation became a weapon more powerful than any army. Cities surrendered at rumours of his approach, and perhaps darkest of all, we remember him for the beautiful mosques, not the 17 million dead. We study his tactical genius, not the pyramids of skulls. Universities, hotels, monuments bear his name. Tour guides in Samarkand speak of him with pride, glossing over how he got the resources to build those magnificent structures. This is how history works. Time doesn't heal wounds, it obscures them. It lets us focus on the useful parts while relegating the uncomfortable to footnotes. Timur's legacy forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How do we construct our historical heroes? The line between hero and monster is drawn by victors, by survivors, by those who inherit beautiful buildings and forget about the skulls in the foundation. June 1941. Soviet archaeologists arrived in Samarkand to open Timur's tomb. Science over superstition. Local elders protested. Legend warned that disturbing the tomb would unleash disaster worse than Timur himself. The archaeologists, good materialists, ignored them. June 19, 1941. They opened the tomb. The skeleton confirmed everything. Withered right leg, malformed hip. Timur had indeed been severely lame. June 22, 1941. 3 days later. Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military operation in history. 4 million troops. It would kill over 26 million Soviet citizens. Coincidence? Obviously. But the story spread like wildfire. Even communist officials quietly wondered. In 1942, as Germans besieged Stalingrad, Timur's remains were reburied with full Islamic rites. Shortly after, the German advance faltered. By February 1943, the Soviets won Stalingrad, turning the tide of war. We don't believe in curses, we're rational people, but the story persists because it captures something true about Tamerlane, not literally, but symbolically. Some legacies are so dark, so steeped in blood, that they remain dangerous even centuries later. This is the story of Tamerlane, the greatest nomad conqueror in history, the architect of systematic terror, the man who painted half of Asia red and called it empire. A story darker than most history books will tell you. But sometimes the darkest stories are the ones we need to remember most, because they remind us what humans are capable of. Not just the dying, but the killing. Not just the suffering, but the inflicting. And they remind us that history doesn't always punish monsters. Sometimes it builds them statues. Sometimes it celebrates their genius while forgetting their victims. The skull pyramids have turned to dust. The cities have been rebuilt. The populations replaced by generations who don't remember. Time has done its work, softening, obscuring. But if you listen carefully, you can still hear them. 17 million ghosts, whispering the name that once made emperors tremble. Tamerlane, the man who proved you can commit genocide and be celebrated for it. The man who showed that terror works. The man who demonstrated that beautiful buildings make people forget about the bodies beneath them. And the man whose story reminds us, the monsters don't always lose. Sometimes they win, sometimes they die old and wealthy, and sometimes centuries later we build them monuments. That's the dark secret history tries to hide. The question is, will we remember?